The manila envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it, the return address printed in serif font that belonged to a law firm whose name I recognized from billboards and late-night television commercials. I knew what it contained before I broke the seal: my ex-husband's final attempt to rewrite history through legal paperwork and carefully constructed narratives about my fitness as a parent. The petition for full custody cited my emotional instability, my inability to provide adequate structure, and a list of incidents so deliberately misrepresented that I barely recognized my own life in the description. What made my hands shake wasn't the lies themselves, but the realization that he had been documenting, recording, building this case for months, while I had believed we were cooperating for our daughter's sake. I set the papers down and stared at the wall of my small apartment, the one I'd rented after he kept the house, and understood that I was about to fight a war I had no resources to win. My ex-husband had money, attorneys on retainer, and a new wife whose family owned half the commercial real estate in the county. I had a paralegal certificate, a daughter who still drew pictures of our family together, and exactly $47 in my savings account after paying this month's rent. Before I explain how I ended up standing in a family courtroom watching my ex-husband's confidence crumble in real time, I want to acknowledge something. If you're listening to this, you've chosen to spend your time with a stranger's pain and eventual triumph. That choice matters more than you know. If any part of this resonates with your own experience, stay with me, because what happens next proves that institutional power isn't always enough to crush the truth. My name is Elise Carmichael. I'm 34 years old, and until 2 years ago, I was married to a man named Brandon who presented himself as a devoted father and successful real estate developer. Our daughter Lily is 7 years old, bright, sensitive, the kind of child who notices everything and processes it all quietly before asking questions that cut straight to the heart of adult hypocrisy. The marriage had been deteriorating for years in ways I only fully understood in hindsight. Brandon worked constantly, traveled frequently, and cultivated a public image of the self-made entrepreneur who valued family above all else. Privately, he was controlling about money, dismissive of my work as a paralegal, and increasingly critical of every parenting decision I made. When Lily was 4, I discovered he'd been having an affair with a woman named Tessa, whose father owned the development company Brandon worked for. The affair had been ongoing for over a year, conducted with the kind of brazen entitlement that comes from believing you'll never face real consequences. I filed for divorce, naively thinking that because I had been the primary caregiver and because Brandon traveled so much for work, custody would naturally favor me. What I didn't understand was that family court doesn't necessarily reward caregiving, it rewards the appearance of stability, and stability is often measured in financial terms. Brandon immediately hired an aggressive attorney named Victoria Marsh, who specialized in high-net-worth divorces and had a reputation for destroying opposing parties through attrition and intimidation. I couldn't afford someone like that, so I worked with a court-appointed mediator and tried to negotiate a settlement that would let both of us remain actively involved in Lily's life. Brandon agreed to joint custody with me as primary custodian, agreed to child support, agreed to everything I proposed. I thought we had reached an understanding. I was wrong. He was buying time, letting me settle into a false sense of security while he systematically built a case to paint me as unfit. The first sign came 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Brandon started requesting additional documentation about Lily's school performance, her medical appointments, her extracurricular activities, requests that seemed reasonable on the surface but felt increasingly invasive. He began showing up at school events with Tessa, now his fiancée, and making small comments to teachers about how concerned he was about Lily's adjustment to the divorce. He suggested I seemed stressed, overwhelmed, possibly struggling with depression. None of it was framed as accusation, just concerned observation from a caring father. When I pushed back, pointing out that Lily was thriving and that my work as a paralegal gave me the flexibility to be present for her in ways his travel schedule never could, he smiled and said he was glad to hear it. Then he filed the custody petition claiming I was emotionally unstable and unable to provide a structured environment. The petition was filed 3 weeks before Lily's 7th birthday. I found out through a process server who appeared at my door on a Saturday morning while Lily was at dance class. Reading through the allegations felt like being gutted. Every moment of normal parental stress had been reframed as evidence of incompetence. The time I'd been late picking Lily up from school because of a traffic accident became evidence of unreliability. The fact that I'd been seeing a therapist to process the divorce became proof of mental health issues that impaired my judgment. The weekend Lily had fallen and scraped her knee at the playground became a failure to properly supervise. Each incident had been documented with dates, times, and often photographs or witness statements from people I didn't even realize had been watching me. It was comprehensive, calculated, and designed to overwhelm me before I even entered a courtroom. I called the family law attorney I'd consulted briefly during the divorce, a kind woman named Patricia who had given me honest advice about what I could afford. "Elise," she said gently after reviewing the petition, "this is serious. Victoria Marsh doesn't file these motions unless she thinks she can win. You need representation, and you need it immediately." I explained my financial situation, the minimal child support that barely covered rent and groceries, the paralegal job that paid enough to survive but not enough to hire attorneys who charged $400 an hour. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I can take your case pro bono," she finally said. "But I need to be honest with you. Victoria has resources I don't. She'll bury us in motions and discovery requests, and Brandon's family has connections in the county. We'll fight as hard as we can, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we might lose." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which gave me exactly 42 days to document that I was a fit parent while also working full-time and trying to shield Lily from the knowledge that her father was attempting to take her away from me. I started keeping meticulous records of everything, every meal I prepared, every homework session, every bedtime story, every doctor's appointment. I photographed the art projects on our refrigerator, saved the notes from her teachers praising her progress, documented every scheduled activity and how I ensured she never missed one. I felt like I was living under surveillance in my own home, hyper-aware that any mistake could be weaponized against me. The stress was suffocating, made worse by the knowledge that Brandon was living in a 4-bedroom house with his new wife, presenting an image of affluence and stability that I could never match from my 2-bedroom apartment. 3 weeks before the hearing, Patricia called with news that made my stomach drop. "Victoria filed a motion for emergency temporary custody," she said. "She's claiming that Lily disclosed something concerning during a visit with Brandon, and they're arguing she's not safe in your care pending the full hearing." My hands went numb. What did Lily supposedly say? Patricia hesitated. "According to their motion, Lily told Brandon you've been leaving her home alone while you run errands. They have a statement from Lily describing being scared when you were gone." It was a lie. I had never left Lily alone, not for 5 minutes, not ever. But I also knew how easy it would be to coach a 7-year-old into saying something that sounded alarming out of context. "They're going to interview Lily," Patricia continued. "The court is appointing a guardian ad litem to assess the situation. This person will talk to both you and Brandon, observe Lily in both homes, and make a recommendation to the judge." The guardian ad litem was a woman named Susan Moretti, a child psychologist with 20 years of experience in custody evaluations. She came to my apartment on a Wednesday afternoon, her presence filling the small space with professional assessment. She observed how Lily interacted with me, asked questions about our routine, examined the home for safety and appropriateness. Lily showed her the bookshelf where we kept library books, the art supplies I'd organized in clear bins, the schedule chart on the wall where she tracked her responsibilities with stickers. Susan took notes constantly, her expression neutral and unreadable. When she interviewed me separately, I explained the allegations point by point, providing documentation for every claim Brandon had made. I showed her school attendance records proving Lily hadn't missed a single day. I showed her medical records demonstrating regular checkups and age-appropriate care. I showed her the therapy notes from my counselor explicitly stating that I was processing grief and stress in healthy ways that didn't impact my parenting. "Ms. Carmichael," Susan said carefully, "you seem like a loving, attentive parent. But I need to ask you directly, have you ever left Lily unsupervised, even briefly?" I met her eyes. Never. Not to run to the mailbox, not to take out trash. Never. I don't know what Lily told Brandon or what he told her to say, but it didn't happen. Susan made a note. "I'll be conducting the same evaluation at Mr. Carmichael's residence. My report will be submitted to the court before the hearing." She left, and I felt the weight of knowing my entire future depended on the observations of someone who had spent 2 hours in my home. A week later, Patricia called again. "Susan's preliminary report is concerning," she said quietly. She noted that while your home is adequate and Lily seems bonded to you, Brandon's home offers significantly more resources: a dedicated bedroom for Lily, a yard, proximity to better schools. She also noted that Tessa doesn't work outside the home and would be available for full-time care, whereas you work 40 hours a week. I felt something break inside me. So having less money makes me a worse parent? Patricia sighed. In family court, unfortunately, sometimes it does. Judges are supposed to consider the best interests of the child, and that often gets conflated with which parent can provide more material advantages. Susan hasn't made a final recommendation yet, but I wanted you to be prepared. I hung up and sat in the silence of my apartment, looking at the life I'd built for Lily from nothing: the carefully budgeted groceries that still allowed for her favorite foods, the second-hand furniture I'd refinished so she'd have a proper desk for homework, the wall calendar color-coded to ensure she never missed dance class or Girl Scouts or library story time. I had given her stability through sheer force of will and love, but apparently that wasn't quantifiable enough to matter. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every possible argument, every piece of evidence, every way this could go wrong. At 2 a.m, I got up and went to Lily's room, watching her sleep with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. She had no idea that tomorrow, adults would sit in a courtroom and debate her future as if she were property to be allocated. I thought about waking her, holding her, promising that everything would be okay. But I couldn't make that promise, and lying to her felt worse than the uncertainty. So I just sat there in the darkness, memorizing the peaceful rise and fall of her breathing, preparing myself for the possibility that I might lose this. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in the most professional outfit I owned, a navy suit I'd bought at a consignment shop, paired with modest heels that pinched my feet. Patricia met me outside the courthouse, her expression grave. "Victoria is going to come at you hard," she warned. "She'll try to make you emotional, make you look unstable. Stay calm, answer only what's asked, and remember that the judge is evaluating your demeanor as much as your answers." We entered the courtroom, a sterile space with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Brandon was already seated with Victoria and Tessa, all three of them projecting an image of unified concern. Brandon caught my eye and had the audacity to look sympathetic, as if he weren't the architect of this entire nightmare. The judge, a stern woman named Judith Blackwell who had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, called the proceedings to order. Victoria opened by painting a picture of a devoted father whose only concern was his daughter's welfare. She described Brandon's stable home, his successful career, his new wife's dedication to creating a nurturing environment for Lily. Then she turned her attention to me, systematically dismantling every aspect of my life. She emphasized my modest income, my small apartment, my work schedule that required Lily to attend after-school care 3 days a week. She brought up my therapy sessions, framing them as evidence of ongoing mental health struggles. She called Brandon's mother as a witness, who testified tearfully that she'd noticed I seemed overwhelmed and distant during family gatherings. Each piece of testimony felt like a stone being added to a pile that would eventually crush me. Patricia cross-examined where she could, but Victoria's case was built on implications rather than provable facts, making it nearly impossible to refute directly. Then Victoria called Lily's dance teacher, a woman named Jennifer whom I'd always had positive interactions with. "Ms. Martinez, have you observed any concerning behavior from Ms. Carmichael?" Victoria asked. Jennifer hesitated. "Well, there was one time she seemed very upset when dropping Lily off. She was crying in her car." My face burned. That had been the day I'd received the custody petition. I'd held myself together until after dropping Lily off, then had a breakdown in the parking lot. Out of context, it sounded like evidence of instability. In reality, it was a normal human response to having your child weaponized against you. Patricia objected, noting that a single emotional moment didn't constitute a pattern, but the damage was done. The judge had seen me through Victoria's lens, struggling, overwhelmed, possibly unfit. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand feeling like I was approaching an execution. Patricia asked me gentle questions about my relationship with Lily, my work schedule, my support system. I explained that while I didn't have Brandon's financial resources, I provided Lily with consistent love, attention, and age-appropriate structure. I described our routines, our rituals, the ways I'd worked to ensure the divorce impacted her as minimally as possible. Then Victoria stood for cross-examination, and her first question made my blood run cold. Ms. Carmichael, isn't it true that you've told multiple people you resent the demands of parenthood? I stared at her. No, that's not true. Victoria smiled. Really? Because we have a text message you sent to a friend stating, and I quote, "Some days I don't know if I can do this anymore." She held up a printed screenshot. My heart sank. I had sent that text to my best friend Rachel during a particularly hard week, referring to managing work and parenting alone, not to being a parent itself. But out of context, it sounded like I was expressing doubt about wanting to be a mother. I was referring to handling everything alone, I said carefully. Not to being Lily's mother. Victoria raised an eyebrow. But you didn't specify that in the message, did you? You just said you didn't know if you could do this anymore. She let the implication hang in the air. I wanted to scream, to explain that every parent has moments of exhaustion that don't mean they love their children less. But Victoria had already moved on to her next attack, asking about a prescription for anxiety medication my doctor had given me 6 months ago. Isn't it true that you've been taking medication for anxiety? She asked. Yes, I admitted. My doctor prescribed it to help me manage stress related to the divorce. And has that stress ever affected your ability to care for Lily? No. But you just testified that you were so overwhelmed you didn't know if you could continue. Which is it, Ms. Carmichael? Are you managing fine, or are you struggling to cope? The trap was perfect. If I admitted to struggling, I looked unstable. If I denied it, I looked dishonest. I took a breath and answered as calmly as I could. I experience normal stress like any single parent. I manage it through therapy and appropriate medical care, and it has never impaired my ability to provide excellent care for my daughter. Victoria smirked and said she had no further questions. I returned to my seat feeling like I'd been flayed alive in front of strangers. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table, but her expression told me what I already knew: we were losing. The judge called a recess to review Susan Moretti's final report, and I sat in the hallway trying not to fall apart while Brandon and Tessa stood at the opposite end looking confident. When we reconvened, Judge Blackwell read from Susan's report in a neutral tone that made it impossible to predict which way this would go. Susan had noted my strong bond with Lily, my consistent care, my efforts to maintain stability despite limited resources. But she had also noted Brandon's superior home environment, Tessa's availability for full-time care, and concerns about whether I could provide the same opportunities for Lily's development. The report didn't make an explicit recommendation, but suggested that increased time with Brandon might be in Lily's best interests. I felt the floor fall away beneath me. Judge Blackwell looked at both parties. I'm troubled by some of the allegations in this case, she said. The claim about Ms. Carmichael leaving Lily unsupervised appears to be unsubstantiated, and I'm concerned about how that information was obtained from a 7-year-old child. She looked directly at Brandon. Mr. Carmichael, did you question your daughter about her mother's parenting practices? Brandon shifted in his seat. I only asked how she was doing, Your Honor. She volunteered the information. Judge Blackwell's expression hardened. A 7-year-old child doesn't volunteer detailed information about being left alone unless prompted by specific questions. I'm also concerned about the timing of this custody modification request, coming so soon after a settlement both parties agreed to. She paused, flipping through papers. However, I'm also obligated to consider the material differences in what each home can provide. My heart was racing. This could go either way. Then the courtroom door opened, and a woman in a professional suit entered, approaching the bench. She handed Judge Blackwell a folder and whispered something inaudible. The judge's eyebrows rose. This is highly irregular, she said. But I'm going to allow it. She looked at Patricia. Counsel, did you request any additional witnesses? Patricia looked as confused as I felt. No, Your Honor. The judge opened the folder and read silently for a long moment. Then she looked up at Brandon with an expression that made him visibly pale. Mr. Carmichael, are you aware that there's currently an active investigation by the State Department of Real Estate regarding fraudulent practices at your company? The courtroom went silent. Brandon's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, I don't see how that's relevant to this custody matter. Judge Blackwell held up a document. I've just been provided with a report indicating that Mr. Carmichael is under investigation for misappropriating client funds and falsifying development project permits. The investigation has been ongoing for 3 months. She looked at Brandon. Were you planning to disclose this to the court? Brandon's face had gone white. That investigation is baseless, Your Honor. It's a witch hunt by competitors. The report indicates there's substantial evidence, Judge Blackwell interrupted, including testimony from multiple former business partners and financial records documenting irregular transactions. She set the papers down. What concerns me most is that you filed this custody petition while knowing you were under investigation for serious financial crimes. Were you planning to use increased custody as a way to access your daughter's college fund or any trusts established for her benefit? Victoria jumped to her feet. Your Honor, that's speculation. It's a reasonable question given the circumstances, the judge said sharply. She looked at me. Ms. Carmichael, does Lily have any trusts or funds in her name? I nodded, still trying to process what was happening. Yes, my mother established a small education trust before she died. It's about $30,000, designated solely for Lily's college expenses. Judge Blackwell made a note. And do the custody arrangements allow either parent access to those funds? Patricia answered. No, Your Honor. The trust is managed by an independent trustee and can only be accessed for educational expenses once Lily turns 18. The judge nodded slowly. I see. She turned back to Brandon. Mr. Carmichael, I'm denying your petition for custody modification. Furthermore, I'm ordering a complete financial audit of your child support payments and any expenses you've claimed related to Lily's care. If the investigation into your business practices results in charges, this court will revisit custody arrangements to determine if your presence poses any risk to your daughter's welfare. Brandon looked like he might be sick. Tessa sat frozen beside him. Victoria was gathering papers with sharp, angry movements. Judge Blackwell wasn't finished. I'm also sanctioning you and your attorney for bringing this petition under false pretenses. The allegations regarding Ms. Carmichael's fitness as a parent appear to have been deliberately exaggerated or misrepresented, and the questioning of a minor child to elicit damaging statements about her mother is deeply concerning. You will both be referred to the State Bar for review. I couldn't breathe. This was impossible. 30 minutes ago, I had been losing everything, and now? Judge Blackwell looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Ms. Carmichael, I want to be clear that while your financial resources are more limited than Mr. Carmichael's, there is no evidence that you are anything other than a devoted, capable mother. Material advantages don't determine fitness, and this court will not remove a child from a loving, stable parent simply because the other parent can provide a bigger house. She signed several documents. Custody remains as originally ordered, with you as primary custodian. I'm also increasing Mr. Carmichael's child support obligation by 30%, effective immediately, and ordering him to cover all costs associated with today's proceeding, including Ms. Carmichael's attorney fees. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. I sat stunned as the courtroom emptied around me. Patricia was grinning, gathering her materials. I don't know what just happened, I whispered. But I'll take it. Patricia shook her head in amazement. Someone dropped that investigation report at exactly the right moment. The timing was... She trailed off, looking at the woman who had delivered the folder to the judge. The woman was leaving through a side door, but she glanced back at me briefly. Our eyes met, and I saw something in her expression, recognition, maybe, or solidarity. Then she was gone. I never learned her name or how she knew to be there at that exact moment. But what I did learn in the weeks that followed was that Brandon's legal troubles were very real. The investigation revealed he'd been running a sophisticated scheme to defraud investors, siphoning funds from development projects and falsifying permits to hide construction defects. Multiple former business partners came forward with evidence. His company collapsed within 2 months, taking his reputation and his wealth with it. The house he'd bought with Tessa, the one that was supposed to prove his superior ability to provide for Lily, went into foreclosure. Tessa left him 3 weeks after that, her father having made it clear that the family wanted nothing to do with Brandon's legal problems. By the time the criminal trial began, Brandon had lost everything he'd used to try to take my daughter from me. He still saw Lily on his scheduled weekends, though those visits became increasingly irregular as he dealt with attorneys and court dates. The supervised visitation requirement I'd feared for myself ended up being applied to him once he was formally charged. Lily adjusted to it all with the resilience of children. Though she asked difficult questions, I did my best to answer honestly. "Is Daddy a bad person?" she asked one night during our bedtime routine. I chose my words carefully. "Daddy made some bad choices that hurt people. But he's still your father, and that doesn't change." She thought about this. "You made good choices," she said finally. "Even when it was hard." I held her tight and let her believe that. Let her think I had somehow been strong enough or smart enough to protect us. The truth was messier. I had been drowning, desperate, outmatched at every turn. And then someone I'd never met had stepped in with information that changed everything. 6 months later, I received an envelope at work. Inside was a letter written on plain paper, unsigned. "Ms. Carmichael, I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I wanted you to know that your case stayed with me. I work as a paralegal for the State Department of Real Estate, and when Brandon Carmichael's name appeared in our investigation files, I remembered reading about his custody petition. The timing seemed suspicious, a man under investigation for financial crimes suddenly seeking increased custody of a child with a trust fund. I couldn't prove intent, but I could make sure the right people knew about the investigation at the right time. I've seen too many good parents destroyed by opponents with more resources and fewer scruples. What happened to you wasn't justice, it was someone with power trying to abuse it. I'm glad the system worked correctly, even if it needed a small push. You don't owe me anything. Just keep being the parent your daughter deserves." I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the box where I kept important documents related to the custody case. I would never know who had written it, would never be able to thank them properly. But their action had saved my life, saved Lily's childhood, saved our family. 2 years have passed now. Lily is 9, thriving in school, still doing dance and Girl Scouts and asking questions that make me think hard about how to explain the world honestly. Brandon was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. He writes letters to Lily that I screen first, and we visit him occasionally because I believe children benefit from maintaining relationships with their parents when possible, even incarcerated ones. He's different now, humbled, maybe, or just broken. He apologized to me once during a visit, though I'm not sure he fully understood what he was apologizing for. Not just for the custody battle, but for ever believing that money and power entitled him to rewrite reality. I still work as a paralegal, still live in the small apartment, still budget carefully and make our life work through planning and determination. But I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I know now that the things I provide Lily, consistency, love, the security of being valued for who she is rather than what she represents, matter more than the things I can't give her. She knows both her parents love her, even if one of them expressed it through control and the other through presence. And she knows that when people tried to say her mother wasn't enough, the truth won out. Not because I was perfect, but because I was genuine. The custody fight taught me that institutional power is real and often tilted toward those with resources. But it also taught me that the system occasionally works, usually when people within it choose integrity over convenience. Someone I never met saw injustice unfolding and decided to act. That anonymous paralegal didn't have to get involved, didn't have to risk her professional position to deliver information that would undermine a custody case she wasn't part of. But she did it anyway, because sometimes justice requires someone to step outside their prescribed role and push the scales back toward balance. I think about her sometimes, wonder if she knows how completely she changed our lives. Wonder if she's done it for others, quietly ensuring that truth emerges when it matters most. I hope she has. I hope there are many people like her, working within systems that often fail the vulnerable, choosing to be the mechanism that makes those systems work correctly. Because without her, I would have lost Lily. The judge was leaning toward Brandon before that investigation report appeared. I could see it in her body language, hear it in her questions. We were losing on the merits of material provision, and no amount of love or dedication would have outweighed Brandon's bigger house and Tessa's availability. The anonymous paralegal understood that and acted accordingly. She used information she had access to through her job, delivered it at exactly the right moment, and disappeared before anyone could question whether it was appropriate. It probably wasn't, strictly speaking. But it was right. And sometimes right and appropriate aren't the same thing. I teach Lily about that distinction now, carefully. I tell her that rules exist for important reasons, but that blind adherence to rules can sometimes perpetuate injustice. I tell her that character is measured not by what you do when everyone is watching, but by what you choose when no one will ever know. And I tell her that she is loved completely, unconditionally, by a mother who will never stop fighting for her right to grow up free from the burden of other people's expectations. That's the inheritance I can give her, the one that doesn't require trusts or wealth or institutional validation. Just the absolute certainty that she is enough, exactly as she is, and that the people who love her will move mountains to protect that truth.